Welcome back. Now we're going to go on to point 7 on page 105, and this is going to carry over all the way to page 109. So this might not be a half hour. It might be like, again, 20 minutes. I don't know until I read it, but let's see. I'm going to go ahead and finish Devadatta now, so we can start fresh with encouraging devotion when we get back together next time. So point 7 on the passage, before his words had come to an end, the Dragon King's daughter suddenly appeared before the Buddha, bowed her head in obeisance, and then retired to one side, reciting these verses of praise. Okay, so Manjushri is sitting there. Manjushri is sitting there. Hopefully I don't have any white shit on my face. Manjushri is sitting there. He's the one that just said this whole big thing, prelude to her, okay? And then she suddenly appears because Shariputra is still saying, how could anybody do this in their present form, okay? So she appears in order to actually show him, all right, that this is all doable, man. You just got to do it. It's based on your faith, man. Point 7 on the passage, before his words had come to an end. Before Manjushri could actually stop talking, the Dragon King's daughter suddenly appeared before the Buddha, bowed her head in obeisance, and then retired to one side, reciting these verses of praise. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, this passage makes it perfectly clear that ignorance, not knowing, is none other than the Dharma nature or enlightenment. For that reason, before Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated had even finished voicing his criticism, in fact, it wasn't Shariputra, it was Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated was the one giving him a hard time, Manjushri a hard time. Okay, so for that reason, before Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated had even finished voicing his criticism, the dragon girl replied to him through her verses of praise in 14 lines. The viewpoint expressed in the Bodhisattva's criticism is that of the specific teaching expounded specifically for Bodhisattvas, which is a view characterized by ignorance, because it doesn't reveal Buddhahood in your present form, okay? Even though it's the highest teaching, it's like we're talking about for Bodhisattvas. Do you understand? Prior to the lotus, prior to this whole, in these more than 40 years, I haven't revealed the truth, that from the, the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra. That's the first time anybody's heard anything different than what he's been saying for all 40 years. Okay, so the viewpoint expressed in the Bodhisattva's criticism, he's not trying to be an asshole. He's just saying, how is that possible? It's not according to the teachings we understand. So he's saying, the viewpoint expressed in the Bodhisattva's criticism is that of the specific teaching expounded specifically for Bodhisattvas, which is a view characterized by ignorance. In other words, it's not fully vetted. It's not really the truth. It's still an expedient means. The reply of the dragon girl represents the viewpoint of the perfect teaching, full and perfect, encompassing everything, which is the viewpoint of the Dharma nature, the thing that includes everything. Wisdom accumulated represents fundamental darkness or ignorance, because he's doubting the truth. Okay, and the dragon girl represents a woman who has realized the Dharma nature. Hence, we see that ignorance is inseparable from the Dharma nature, and the Dharma nature is inseparable from ignorance. So our ignorance, just like me not knowing that a long vowel is 2 beats, I just didn't know that. That kind of thing doesn't end just because you attain Buddhahood. There's always going to be things that you thought you knew that you find a clarity to, okay? And hence we see that ignorance is inseparable from the Dharma nature, and the Dharma nature is inseparable from ignorance. So knowing everything isn't the goal. Understanding everything is the goal. Okay, there's a difference. If the Dharma nature has been activated, then you understand the inseparability of everything, and everything else becomes clear without you even being told that. Okay, Now when Nichiren and his followers, continuing on page 105, chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, they represent the moment referred to in the sutra as before his words had come to an end. That is, the moment when the previous affair, the criticism of the Bodhisattva, the Dragon King's daughter, is just coming to an end, and the subsequent affair, the reply of the Dragon Girl, is just beginning. The moment then is one in which ignorance and the Dharma nature exist simultaneously. Such is the moment when Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is chanted. So when we're in front of the Gohonzon chanting Daimoku, we don't just automatically go into a state of a samadhi or a sincere pondering of the teaching itself, okay? Or chanting for Kosen Rufu, or doing all the kinds of things a Buddha would really do. We worry about paying the bills. We worry about getting out of financial problems. We worry about illnesses. We worry about our aging and death, our lifespan. We worry about things that are not necessary to worry about. But we worry about all of them in front of the Gohonzon when we are already in a state of Buddhahood as well. So our enlightenment to the truth does not eliminate pondering things that are ridiculous to think about if we have absolute faith. And it doesn't mean that we don't have absolute faith. It's already qualifying here. Don't worry about that part, bro, because you're already chanting. That's just momentary little bullshit. That's an ignorance that can't be gotten rid of. Okay? All right, so the moment then is one in which ignorance and the Dharma realm, the Dharma nature exists simultaneously. Such is the moment when Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is chanted. All right, the reason Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated is said to represent fundamental darkness lies in the words, I cannot believe. Because that's what he said. I cannot believe that anybody could actually, how is that possible? Okay, I cannot believe is a really bad position to take. I couldn't have found out about 2 beats being considered a long vowel if I hadn't said to myself, maybe I need to check this out further. Okay, so the reason wisdom accumulated is said to represent fundamental darkness lies in the words, I cannot believe in his statement, I cannot believe this girl in the space of an instant could actually achieve correct enlightenment from chapter 12. Not to believe is to harbor doubt and perplexity. So now this is where we get into the stuff that we got to stay away from. Okay, doubt and perplexity. Perplexity only comes from you not taking the next step to investigate what you think you know that you don't know. And finding out, oh, I didn't know. Okay? And that's a part of the nature, the absolute nature of enlightenment as well. That's what he just explained. The Dharma nature and ignorance cannot be separated. So the only way you're going to grow is to overcome perplexity through study or through some other process of chanting in front of the Gohonzon. Okay? And to harbor doubt means you're questioning whether the teaching that Nichiren has laid out himself for you, okay, whether he could be really telling you the truth. Does he really know what he's talking about? That's doubt, okay? There can be no doubt about that. That's called mugi washing. That's doubt-free faith. That's what we have to be able to deserve from a causal circumstance the incredible reward of this jewel coming to us unsought. Do you understand? So it's very important. I love this chapter because it's all about things that are different from perfection, you know? Not to believe is to harbor doubt and perplexity, and doubt and perplexity are symptomatic of fundamental darkness. When you have doubt or perplexity, the devil of the sixth heaven is trying to screw with you, and you need to have the faith to know to get in front of the Gohonzon at that time. Fundamental darkness or ignorance. Again, ignorance is not knowing that everything that you're being told is the absolute truth and doubting something about it. The reason the dragon girl is said to represent Dharma nature or enlightenment is the passage in which she says, I unfold the doctrines of the great vehicle to rescue living beings from suffering. So, what's the significance of that? As for the dragon girl, her father is a dragon, and she is his 8-year-old daughter. The words dragon girl imply that both father and daughter attain Buddhahood at the same time. That is why the passage says, then the Dragon King's daughter suddenly appeared before the Buddha. Since it is said that she is the Dragon King's daughter, we know that the Dragon King is her father, and she is his 8-year-old daughter. Thus, the daughter is shown attaining Buddhahood in this chapter, while the attainment of Buddhahood by her father, the Dragon King, has already been implied in the introduction chapter, because that's when he's mentioned. The 4 Dragon Kings are part of the assembly, right? And as seen in the passage that says that at the assembly in which the Lotus Sutra was preached, there were 8 Dragon Kings. I stand corrected, not 4, 8. See that number 8, man. Therefore, we may say that both father and daughter attain Buddhahood simultaneously, since the introduction chapter serves as an introduction to all the chapters of the Lotus Sutra. And having heard his teachings, I have attained Bodhi. Chapter 12. These are the words of the dragon girl when she rebukes wisdom accumulated. And therefore, she goes on to say that only the Buddha can testify to this fact. Only the Buddha knows that I've attained Buddhahood, that what I'm saying is the truth. And having heard his teachings, I have attained Bodhi. Okay? The Buddha alone can bear witness to this. When she speaks of rescue, so in other words, what this is basically saying is only the Gohonzon and you know whether or not you've actually attained doubt-free faith, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Okay? There's nobody that can look at you and qualify that for you. Okay? So don't ever let anybody put you down to say you don't know shit, you're this or you're that. You know, you're the Buddha. If you chant with faith, that's like introduction chapter already covered everybody. Okay? So this is when we start breaking it down to our individual selves as rather than being considered as a group thing that we really didn't understand in the introduction chapter. All right? So he says, and however, we may say that both father and daughter attained Buddhahood simultaneously, since the introduction chapter serves as an introduction to all chapters in the Lotus Sutra. And having heard his teachings, the Buddha's, I have attained Bodhi, chapter 12. These are the words of the dragon girl when she rebukes wisdom accumulated. And therefore she goes on to say that only the Buddha can testify to this fact. Because, again, only the Gohonzon knows whether or not you're sincere in your faith. You can act like you are, and you may not be. All right? You may think that you are, and you may not be. All right? And having heard his teachings, I have attained Bodhi. The Buddha here can bear witness to this. And when she speaks of rescuing living beings from suffering, however, she is speaking of rescuing women in particular. Because up until now, women were not capable of attaining Buddhahood at all. All right? The verses of praise in 14 lines express the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. That all things in the phenomenal realm have the 3,000 realms present in their manifest form. The words, he profoundly understands the signs of guilt and good fortune and illuminates the 10 directions everywhere. Everywhere. That's the 10. He profoundly understands the signs of guilt and good fortune and illuminates the 10 directions everywhere. Not just the people in it, the entire Dharma realm in each one of those places he illuminates, okay? That includes the environment and all the living beings in it. Refers to the 10 worlds, okay? Which includes all the 10 worlds of everything everywhere. This passage on how the 8-year-old dragon girl attained Buddhahood is particularly noteworthy because it refers to the ancestors of the rules who uphold the Lotus Sutra. The first human sovereign of Japan was Emperor Jimmu. Emperor Jimmu was the son of Ugaya Fuki Eezuno Mikoto, the fifth of the 5 generations of earthly deities. The mother of Ugaya-fuki Azeyuno Mikimoto was Princess Toyotama, the daughter of the Dragon King Sagara, and the elder sister of the 8-year-old dragon's girl. Therefore, we know that the ancestors of the rulers of Japan were votaries of the Lotus Sutra. a fact of profound significance, a fact of profound significance. Therefore, this one chapter titled Devadatta is a vital sword to be worn at the waist everywhere throughout the world. Wow, listen to this. Therefore, this one chapter titled Devadatta is a vital sword to be worn at the waist everywhere throughout the world. It is a secret law to cut down the foes of ignorance and earthly desires and to sever the bonds of birth and death, longing and attachment. Emperor Kaotsu, founder of the Han Dynasty, had his 3-foot sword, but it cannot compare to this one-word sword of wisdom. Myo, or wonderful, the one-word sword of wisdom, can sever the bonds of birth and death and earthly desires. Okay, because when you become a Buddha, you're always a Buddha. Now severing the bonds of birth and death and earthly desires. Devadatta represents fiery flames. The dragon girl represents a giant reptile, and Manjushri represents the sword of wisdom. An orally transmitted teaching says that all these three elements are represented in the form of the wisdom king, immovable, the fire and the flames surrounding him, the reptile and the dragon that winds itself around his sword, and the sword of wisdom in the sword he holds. Devadatta also represents the principle, and that's in these three elements are represented in the form of the wisdom king, immovable. All right, and so there have been representations of him as an object of devotion created. Okay, and they all carry the same characteristics of him having a reptile wrapped around his sword. And it is the sword he holds. That's what he's trying to say. I'll say it again. Devadatta represents fiery flames. The dragon girl represents a giant reptile, and Manjushri represents the words of wisdom, the sword of wisdom. All these are different swords. An orally transmitted teaching says that these three elements are represented in the form of the wisdom king, immovable, which is on the Gohonzon, the fire and the flame surrounding him, the reptile and the dragon that winds itself around his sword, and the sword of wisdom in the sword that he holds. Devadatta represents the principle that our earthly desires are none other than enlightenment, that even though we have earthly desires, we're still Buddhas. The dragon girl represents the principle that the sufferings of birth and death are none other than nirvana. There's no separation between anything in the original state. The name Manjushri can be translated as wonderful virtue. This wonderful virtue contains within it both earthly desires and the sufferings of birth and death. In this chapter, it serves as the element that acts to convert others to the truth, to bring forth the truth from inside their lives. Point 8, at the bottom of page 107. Point 8 on the passage, at that time, the dragon girl had a precious jewel worth as much as 1,000,000,000-fold world, or a major world system, in which she presented to the Buddha. The Buddha immediately accepted it. The dragon girl said to Bodhisattva wisdom accumulated, and to the venerable one, Shariputra, I presented the precious jewel, and the world-honored one accepted it. Was that not done quickly done? They replied, very quickly. The girl said, employ your supernatural powers and watch me attain Buddhahood. It will be even quicker than that. Okay? It continues. The volume 8 of Words and Phrases, Tentai says, the first presentation of the jewel symbolizes the attainment of perfect understanding. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, in the phrase, a precious jewel, the sword, I should do that in between, but I forget to. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says, in the phrase, a precious jewel, the word a or one indicates Myoho Renge-kyo, abbreviated Myoho, or the wonderful law. Precious indicates the workings of the wonderful law, and the jewel indicates the entity of the wonderful law. Because it is myo, or wonderful, it embodies the element of the mind. And because it is ho, or the law, it embodies the element of form, or the body. The body phenomena are the jewel, and the mind potentials are the precious element in it. The words wonderful law indicate that body and mind are not two different entities. Now let me reread that and put some clarity to it. In the phrase a precious jewel, the word a, or one, indicates myoho rengekyo, abbreviated myoho, or wonderful law. In other words, he says this indicates nam-myoho rengekyo, but we're going to focus on myoho as wonderful law because it's how it's referred to by Manjushri. Precious indicates the workings of the wonderful law, or by the Dragon King's daughter, whatever. Precious indicates the workings of the wonderful law, okay? The mystic reality that you know, brings us to the law, that we use to manifest the needs that we have for our lives, that the things that keep us going so that we finally get to stage 6 and attain Buddhahood in our present form, okay? And the jewel indicates the entity of the wonderful law. We are all entities of the wonderful law. So we give ourselves to the Buddha, which is exactly what we're doing when we devote our lives to the Gohonzon. And that's what he's really talking about here, okay? So let me just read it quickly again. The record of the orally transmitted teaching says in the phrase, a precious jewel, the word a, or one, indicates myoho rengekyo, abbreviated as myoho, or wonderful law. Precious indicates the entity of the wonderful law, okay? Our living body, reward body, and dharma body, right? Because it is myo, or wonderful, it embodies the element of the mind, okay? This is already included. And because it is ho, or the law, it embodies the element or form of the body. Our living entities, right? The body phenomena are the jewel. The body phenomena. You're a phenomena at this point in time. You're a temporary gathering of the 5 components. So you are a phenomena. How could those 5 components come together and make you? Okay, so you say the body phenomena are the jewel. The jewel's worth what? It's worth a major world system. It's worth more than a major world system. The jewel that the Dragon King's daughter gave to the Buddha is a priceless jewel, okay? And the mind potentials, because you have to use your mind to get there, are the precious elements in the jewel, the precious elements of the pre-existing 3 bodies. The words wonderful law indicate that the mind and the body and mind are not 2 different entities. Expressing the principle of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, expressing Buddhahood in her present form, the dragon girl presents the precious jewel to the Buddha as we do our lives to the Gohonzon for the sake of the law, right? For the sake of Kosen Rufu. This has never had anything to do about widespread propagation. We do that in the latter day, because only in the latter ages there's some manner in which everybody can do it without there being a separation of intellect and qualification of all that sort of thing. Expressing the principle of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, the dragon girl presents the precious jewel to the Buddha. When Words and Phrases Tentai says that this symbolizes the attainment of perfect understanding, it is referring to the principle of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. It's enlightenment. It's stage 6. When you give your life to the Gohonzon in stage 6, that's when you say, I'm a Buddha too. I got to live up to that reality. I've created for myself without realization. At that time, when the precious jewel was still in the hands of the dragon girl, it represented the attainments that were inherent in her nature. But when the Buddha accepted the precious jewel, okay, as the Gohonzon and we in our present forms become one, it's no longer outside of ourselves hanging there. It's our life itself. But when the Buddha accepted the precious jewel, it became representative of the attainments acquired through religious practice. Herein is embodied the principle that acquired through practice and inherent in nature are not two different things. Not two different things. We take what's inherent in nature and we build off of it through practicing so that we attain a level of wisdom that we had not been in possession of or been aware of prior to making that effort. The words very quickly represent the doctrine of sudden fulfillment. This is how enlightenment occurs. It occurs in a single moment of life. When all of this, you believe in all this maybe even, but you still don't really completely believe that you already are, because you already know you're not perfect. And you keep thinking the Buddha's perfect. And he's already said good and evil are the same thing. Everything's the same thing. You know, all these opposites are really one thing. You just have to flip it all. So you're not ever really truly bad. You just are showing the wrong side of your own nature. You have to work and create cause to make that manifest differently. The words very quickly represent the doctrine of sudden fulfillment, which is Buddhahood, sudden and swift attainment, which is Buddhahood, that single moment of life, or sudden enlightenment, that single moment of life. The same idea is expressed in the passage in chapter 7 of the Lotus Sutra that reads, "This way one will quickly attain the unsurpassed Buddha way." In the term Jinriki or supernatural powers, the word Jin or supernatural represents the element of the mind, and the word Riki or powers represents the element of the body. Makes sense. When the dragon girl says, "Watch me attain Buddhahood," Shariputra thinks she is referring only to her own attainment of Buddhahood. But this is an error. She is rebuking him by saying, "Watch how one attains Buddhahood." The word kan, or watch, refers to the kan of the 6 stages of practice. The 6 stages of practice of Tentai's great concentration and insight. Here one should understand it as pertaining to the kan, or perception, that is represented in the second of the 6 stages, the stage of hearing the name and the words of the truth. You don't have to get to stage 6. You're going to get to stage 6. Once you get to stage 2, you're going to get to stage 6. It's only a matter of time. You can't escape it. All right? So he says, here one should understand it is pertaining to the kan, or perception, that is represented in the second of the 6 stages, the stage of hearing the name and the words of the truth. Therefore, as soon as one hears Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and that's why when we do Shakabuku, we don't have to grab them and take them to the, to the headquarters and convert them on the spot. We have already planted the seed by them just hearing Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's nothing more supernatural than that. Their karma takes over from there. They're the reason they end up going to the Kaikon, not you, because you drove them and suggested that they do it. Their Buddha nature that's innate within their life and their karma from previous lifetimes have now culminated in them revealing their true identity in this lifetime. And that's all that is going and receiving the Gohonzon is. So here one should understand it as pertaining to the kan, or perception, that is presented by the second of the 6 stages, that stage of hearing the name and the words of the truth. Therefore, as soon as one hears Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, as volume 8 of Words and Phrases says in speaking of the dragon girl, as Tentai said in speaking of the dragon girl, without a doubt for a moment in the place of practice and thus attained, without a doubt sat for a moment in the place of practice and thus attained Buddhahood. When the sutra says that the members of the assembly saw the dragon girl change into a man, which some of the sutras had to change because that was not possible. Women, they're shit. Man, they never going to attain Buddhahood. They got all these things and they're dirty. Once a month they have menstrual periods. All of this shit was held against the female gender, even though it was the one that was keeping the population manifest. It makes no sense. Okay, so and everybody had a mother. How could you feel that way toward your mom? Okay, I didn't have that opportunity, so I have a special feeling toward moms. When the sutra says that the members of the assembly saw the dragon girl change into a man, she didn't change into a man. It means that the dragon girl's original state, that of a dragon girl, was already in the state of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. This idea is brought out very clearly in this passage of the sutra. So this passage of the sutra disqualifies all the bullshit that followed in the misrepresentation of what was being stated in the Lotus Sutra, and that women had to become men first, which means that they would have to wait for another lifetime, wouldn't they? Okay, which means that the promise of attainment in your present form was restricted only to men. There are 250 precepts and 500 precepts for women. That's the bullshit of the provisional teachings. That's why this is called the true teaching, the grand equality of the Lotus Sutra. Thank you very much. Next, we'll go on to chapter 13, encouraging devotion. 13 important points. Talk to you then.